That is nature in action. That is the law in action. Nothing feels as good as doing what you ought to do. Hooty hoo! We're back with another daily reflection on the daily Vedantic. And today's episode is on perhaps the most common misconception about a spiritual life, especially philosophical life in this direction, a Vedantic life. When a philosophy proposes this virtue of renunciation, as loudly as Vedanta does, many people see that as, okay, you got to give up the world to pursue that philosophy. To do it right, you got to give up all of these things that I love. And that is the exact opposite of what this philosophy is saying. It's saying that your attachment to the things that you love are destroying the joy you have with them. Anyone knows if you're too attached to someone that you're dating, too attached to another person, too attached to a boss, you slowly but surely crush that relationship dynamic. It's too much. That attachment which comes from fear of losing it or desire of having more of it, that attachment destroys that bond. Maybe you've been on the other side of what they used to call a stage 5 clinger, I think. Wedding Crashers, amazing movie. You've been on the other side of someone just not giving you any space to yourself. And that ended up being the reason you called off that relationship. That clinging, that attachment, that desire for another person ends up destroying the joy that you have with that person. Same is said for ice cream. That 100th bite make you sick to your stomach versus the first. If you are always full to the brim in your stomach, it could be your favorite meal in front of you, and it would have no appeal. There is this push, this pull, this ebb and flow, this beautiful dynamic of moving away and moving towards the things that we love that give them the qualities that we love about them. That break is what presents this almost like a womb of joy when you finally take a bite and you say, yes, it tastes so good. Even a chain smoker has a limit. 20 cigarettes right in a row, too much for them. So where does that joy come from? And it comes from that distance, that space, that abstinence from that thing that we enjoy. But on a deeper level, this philosophy is not only telling us, be careful of the destruction you're undertaking with the things that you enjoy. Be careful because your love of getting good at that sport, if done unwisely, will destroy your love of that sport. Will destroy the very thing that you love within that sport, that pursuit, that professional milestone you're aiming for, that relationship with your children. All of these things that in our minds theoretically are pure. We have countless examples of people around us that then destroy their relationship with that person or thing or that goal. But deeper than that, this philosophy is not just saying be careful of destroying that relationship. It's saying the key towards a strong relationship with a child, with a goal, with another person, with that ice cream is through renunciation. Because here is the underlying truth about renunciation within the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. It's not about giving anything up. Swami will go so far as to say, you can't give anything up. 5-year-old child is not going to give up its favorite toy because you say, hey, I think you should give that up. I think there's better things waiting for you if you give that up. And we are essentially the same wiring as any 5-year-old. We are barely wiser than a 5-year-old with all of the things that we love. So you can't give anything up. But what this philosophy says is when you take something up, the lower falls away. That renunciation is not because of some deliberate move within your willpower. It's because you've taken up something higher. The child that gives up the trinkets. Our 6-year-old gives toys to our 3-year-old, her little sister, all the time. Not because she is spiritually renouncing her attachment to them, but because she got better toys. She's moving from trinkets and figurines to a bicycle. She is attached to something that she views as better, and the lower falls away. The attachment, renunciation, the higher, the lower. Within this philosophy, it's all internal. It is all internal. The things we're attached to, they're actually internal. Feelings, joy over sorrow, pleasure over pain, these are all internal. The higher ideals. Another word for Vedanta is Sanatana Dharma, which means eternal principles. These eternal principles, these higher ideals, when you attach to them, you attach to a high ideal like, okay, I'm going to serve my spouse this evening. Because I heard on a podcast once that nothing feels as good as doing what you ought to do. And well, she or he has been really serving me lately. I ought to repay the favor. You try that out. And you recognize the peace that you feel within. You recognize that, holy shit, maybe there's something to this phrase. Nothing feels as good as doing what you ought to do. And you start to attach to that ideal. You show the 6-year-old a bicycle and they're like, maybe I don't want that. So maybe that's not that great of a toy. I love these figurines. And then their exposure to the bicycle, start to play around with it. They recognize, wow, this is awesome. I just want to ride this all day long. I don't care about these figurines. I don't care about them so much so that, Marley, you can have these. Similarly, this idea of just a principle that comes to mind is nothing feels as good as doing what you ought to do. This is something that Swami said 100 times. And after a while, looking around it, thinking, is that true? Like the bike, you try it on. You discover, wow, this feeling is so much better than sitting on the couch, watching a basketball game, knowing that my spouse is working to clean after dinner, is putting the laundry up. You try it out. You switch roles. You say, hey, honey, why don't you relax? Why don't you catch up on any work or listen to a podcast? Let me do the cleaning. And you just watch internally how it feels. You recognize that lifted mood makes you feel so great when you're going to bed later that night. In the room, moods are as contagious as colds. You catch that great mood back. You feel like, wow, I did what I ought to do. And it just felt good. Instead of feeling like I'm taking, felt like I was giving. And we actually know this with modern neurochemistry that when we take, we release our neurochemistry for fear. Someone knows that I took this last donut in this experiment. Someone knows that I took it. I'm not as safe as I once was before I took this donut. You give the last donut. No, you have it. You don't have a donut, but now you have a social bond, an ally towards whatever greater designs you might have beyond just pleasing the taste buds. And you actually release the neurochemicals of joy, satisfaction, and feeling safe. That is nature in action. That is the law in action. Nothing feels as good as doing what you ought to do. Sure, one comes with an explosion on your taste buds of a donut, but that is short-lived. The other one comes with an internal satisfaction and a feeling of safety. Much longer lived than a few bites of a donut. So you try that out. You ride the bike. Start to get good at it. You start recognizing, God, that feels so good. Putting in a hard day's work felt amazing afterward. Doing that workout and doing it sincerely, that felt amazing afterward. Then the lower just starts to fall away. Time on the couch gets replaced by time in the gym. Time for selfish video gaming gets replaced with service. And there's no judgment. You can still have the time for the video gaming. You can still have the time for watching any and all sports matches. I love the Cowboys, for example. But even a Cowboys win at this point doesn't feel as good as my spouse and then our 3 girls benefiting from just a elevated frequency in the house because I did what I ought to do instead of the opposite. That feels so much better than a Cowboys W. If they win a Super Bowl, we'll see. But for right now, regular season games, I can tell you, I've attached to the higher, just using my own selfishness for wanting the house to feel good, for wanting to have that elevated frequency in the house, for wanting to feel safe, just purely hijacking my own attachments, my own selfishness, but attaching to the higher, and the lower falls away. With ease, I just won't even turn the game on if something's coming up with our 3 little girls. And in truth, I'm not renouncing anything. I've just taken up something higher. You can live in a palace, and that inner transformation, from others' perspective, it looks like, oh, well, of course, that person has inner peace because they have everything materially that I'd ever want. And in fact, there are many sages and saints. King Janaka, a famous one, was a king. Krishna was a prince. There's nothing about this philosophy that says you can't have possessions and a lot of them. In fact, the world might just say, hey, you should be the steward of a lot of capital because you steward that money, those finances, quite smartly. We're all benefiting, so let's give you more money. You could be a billionaire, 5 homes, and it have nothing to do with renunciation. In fact, you might get there faster, more ease, less effort, by attaching to the higher, the lower falling away. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic, on the great misconception of what renunciation is and what it isn't. We'll see you next time.